Her daughter-in-law laughed when she walked into court in thrift store shoes. Her son looked away. She didn't flinch, just placed her spreadsheets on the bench. Every grocery, every mortgage payment, every time they said she was just staying, documented. "They said I was a guest," she said. "I was a co-owner. And their fallback plan." Then she walked out with the deed in her purse, and no one to thank but herself. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." The laughter didn't wait for the food. It came quietly, like steam rising from a cup, warm, thin, and laced with judgment. Teresa hadn't even settled into her seat before Amanda leaned sideways, whispered something into Caleb's ear, and tilted her phone ever so slightly toward him. His lips twitched, suppressing a laugh. Then came the ripple. Soft chuckles from the other end of the table, muffled behind water glasses and linen napkins. Teresa looked down at her shoes, deep brown loafers, leather scuffed at the toe, soles worn soft. Thrifted, yes, but polished and clean. She'd worn them through more than one winter and more than one disappointment. "Mom," Caleb said, grinning too wide, "you should treat yourself sometime." She met his eyes evenly, the same way she'd done when he was 8 and tried to lie about eating cookies before dinner. "I do," she said quietly. Amanda reached across the table, pouring more orange juice into a crystal flute that wasn't hers. "We just want you to feel good, you know? That's what brunch is about, feeling fresh." Teresa glanced around the oversized table. Every plate was pristine, stacked in layers, white on pearl, napkins folded into tulips. A tower of brioche French toast dripped with whipped cream in the center like a crown. It all looked like a catalog. She wondered if Amanda had staged it for content. She folded her hands in her lap, the leather strap of her purse pressing against her wrist, and said nothing. The waitress arrived with menus. No one looked at them. "We'll do the prefix," Amanda said sweetly, then smiled down the table. "Right, babe?" Caleb nodded. "And a bottle of Prosecco." Amanda added, "We're celebrating. Family's everything, right?" Teresa arched a brow slightly. No one noticed. They were already back on their phones, scrolling, tapping, sliding into curated realities. Her hands slipped under the table, finding her phone. She opened her banking app in silence. The screen lit up. $1,200, household transfer, Teresa, cleared, just like it had the first of every month for the past 4 years. Rent, utilities, groceries, her silent contribution to the home she technically still co-owned, though no one ever said that out loud. A toast clinked from above. "To new beginnings," Amanda chirped, raising her glass high. Teresa raised her water. The ice had already melted. The food arrived. Steam swirled upward like ribbon. Teresa's omelet sat untouched as Caleb and Amanda took selfies, both angling to catch the natural light spilling in from the windows. She watched Amanda tilt her head, smile with precision, then quickly glance at the screen to review the shot. "Let me try one with you, babe," Amanda said, pulling Caleb close. They posed again. Teresa caught the flash of the camera's reflection in the spoon beside her plate. She wasn't in the frame, not even close. She looked away, out the window where bare branches waved like bony fingers. In her mind, she saw every grocery bag she'd carried in from the car, every checkbook line item she'd recorded, every packed lunch she'd prepped for her grandkids while Amanda slept in after late-night content planning. "Can you pass the syrup, Mom?" Amanda asked absently. Teresa handed it over, her movements precise and smooth. Amanda didn't say thank you. The brunch continued. Bright laughter, bubbling glasses, the occasional squeal from Amanda when her Instagram story got a new comment. Teresa chewed slowly, the edges of her mouth tinged with something like amusement. They didn't ask her how she was. They hadn't noticed when she cut her hair last month. They didn't even ask where she got the money to treat herself if she ever wanted to. She glanced at her shoes again. Still worn, still quiet. The waitress dropped off the check, and Amanda slid it toward Caleb without glancing at it. Teresa watched him take it, hesitate, then glance at her briefly, like maybe he'd ask her to cover her share. He didn't. As they stood to leave, Amanda took one more photo of the empty table, captioning it, "Grateful for mornings like this, No tags, no mention. In the parking lot, as the others chatted near their cars, Teresa sat quietly in the back seat of Caleb's SUV, her phone still in her palm. She tapped once. The banking app reopened. Her deposit sat there, clean, steady, unthanked. She looked out at Amanda's heels clicking on the pavement and slowly closed the app. But before she did, her thumb hovered over the menu. Add new transfer rule? Not yet, but soon. Teresa checks her banking app under the table. Her monthly deposit just cleared into the household fund. They told me I looked tired. I was. The front door closed behind Teresa with a whisper instead of a click. It was still morning, but the light had changed, flattened by the thin veil of afternoon gray. She slipped off her shoes by the entryway, one at a time, placing them neatly beneath the bench where no one else bothered to put theirs. Amanda's voice floated in from the kitchen, bright but edged. "You okay, Teresa? You looked a little tired at brunch." Teresa turned toward the sound and walked slowly into the kitchen, where Amanda was arranging reusable containers into a too-small fridge already filled with branded smoothie bottles and meal prep kits. The overhead light hummed. "Tired?" Teresa echoed. Amanda didn't look up. "Just saying. You know, if these things are too much, early brunch, loud restaurants, maybe next time just take it easy. Skip it." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "We don't want you feeling run down." Teresa paused. The air between them felt just slightly colder than the fridge door Amanda had left open. She picked up an apple from the counter, turned it in her hand slowly. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, and walked past her, the floor creaking with each step. Inside her room, she sat at the corner of her bed and stared at the closed blinds. A single sliver of light cut through and landed on the armchair beside her dresser. It felt like a spotlight on the silence. Teresa turned and opened the drawer. The receipts were in a rubber-banded stack, months of them, neatly folded, dated, color-coded by highlighter, a system of quiet record-keeping no one knew she kept. She began flipping through them, her eyes narrowing only slightly with each page. Milk, apples, diapers, paper towels, gym snacks, always from the same store, always paid by card. Her card. She reached the March folder. Inside was a smaller receipt, thinner stock, not groceries, $180, Serenity Spa and Wellness gift card, purchase notes, happy birthday. Amanda Teresa blinked. The penmanship wasn't hers. She stared at the handwriting for a long moment. Rounded, bubbly, Amanda's, unmistakably. Teresa leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly through her nose, as if trying to cool something that had just begun to boil. Then she stood, crossed the room, and opened her closet. In a shoebox labeled Utilities, she retrieved a paperclip of bank statements. She flipped to March, eyes tracing the charge. There it was, her account, her money, and Amanda's spa day. From the hallway came the buzz of Amanda's phone, followed by a laugh. Teresa glanced at her own phone and opened the family group chat. A new message had just come through from Amanda. "Excited for Jenna's wedding next month. Can't wait for all of us to go." But when Teresa opened the RSVP list linked in the message, she noticed something missing. Her name. Her address had been used for the invitation to arrive, but she hadn't been included in the guest count. She refreshed the screen once, twice. Still nothing. She clicked the group message again. Beneath Amanda's cheerful post, someone had replied, "Got your +1 yet?" Amanda answered immediately, "Working on it." Teresa stared at the blinking cursor, then pressed the side button and locked her screen. She walked to her dresser, picked up the spa receipt again, and clipped it to a fresh page in her notebook. At the top, she wrote in slow, clear letters, "Unauthorized expenses, household account." Her hand paused as she capped the pen. She could hear Amanda laughing with someone on speaker in the kitchen now, the way someone laughs when they believe they're admired. "She's exhausted all the time," Amanda was saying. "If she wants to stay home, honestly, that's fine." Teresa returned the notebook to the drawer, stood and smoothed her shirt. The house didn't feel like home anymore, but the ledger she'd started? That felt like truth. Finds a purchase she didn't make, A spa gift card labeled Amanda. They told people I was staying with them. I paid half the mortgage. The house sounded different when no one thought you were listening. Teresa had just finished watering the ferns by the window when Amanda's voice, bright and rehearsed, floated down the hallway. It came from the kitchen, edged with syrupy politeness she reserved for phone calls and Instagram videos. "Oh, we've had her with us for a while now," Amanda said. "It's been, an adjustment." There was a short pause. Whoever was on the other end must have said something, and then Amanda added with a sympathetic sigh, "Well, we didn't want to put her in assisted living. This way she still feels included." The words hit like a glass slowly tipping off a counter. No crash, just inevitability. Teresa didn't step into the kitchen. She moved like breath, quiet and invisible, toward the foyer instead. Her eyes flicked to the framed family photo on the console table. Caleb, Amanda, the kids. Herself in the back row, just off-center, the frame's edge brushing her shoulder. She looked beyond it, to the front door. More specifically, to the black file box on the shelf beside it, the one Amanda had always referred to as Caleb's stuff. Teresa reached up and opened it. The lid creaked. Inside were packets of paper, mortgage updates, utility statements, school fee letters. She leafed through them until she found what she suspected would be missing. Her name. Nowhere. Not on the printouts, not on the filing labels, not even scribbled in pen. Amanda's voice piped up again, now laughing. "She's sweet, really? But it's like having an antique that talks." Teresa closed the box. She turned from the door and headed for the stairs, each step deliberate, as though the creak of wood beneath her feet deserved respect. In her room, the one they called the guest suite, though it had once been built with her in mind, she opened her closet and reached for the black accordion folder on the top shelf. It was older than Amanda, worn at the edges but still sturdy. She placed it on the desk, sat down, and opened the clips. Inside, the co-ownership agreement from 2011. Not a printout, the original, signed in blue ink, notarized, witnessed. Her name, Teresa M. Vasquez, written in perfect cursive next to Caleb's. It wasn't charity, it wasn't pity, it was investment. Back when Caleb had called her in tears, saying the bank wouldn't approve the loan on his income alone. Back when Amanda had said, "We'd be so lucky to have you live with us someday." Back when things were promises, not performances. She flipped to the amendment Caleb had added in 2014, refinancing terms. Her contribution listed clearly, monthly, automatic, from her retirement account. $1,100 per month, every month, for nearly 9 years. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the truth land with its full weight. They had told people she was staying with them, as if she had wandered in one day and asked for shelter, as if she didn't fund the electricity that lit Amanda's food photography, as if she didn't pay for half the couch Amanda curled up on for her sponsored skincare tutorials, as if she were lucky to be tolerated. She opened her phone, searched her banking app, scrolled to the transfer history, May, April, March, February, her deposits steady and loyal like herself. Down the hallway, a door slammed, and one of the kids shouted something about snacks. Amanda's voice called back, high and clipped. Teresa didn't register the words. She opened a new document on her computer and began typing. Property contributions. Teresa M. Vasquez, 2011, present. She began to itemize line by line, not just the mortgage, not just the groceries, but the forgotten, invisible labor no one counted. Watching the kids after school, staying up when they were sick, cleaning the fridge on Thursdays because Amanda never noticed it needed it. She added a line break, witnessed statements, to be added. She stood, stretched her spine, and let her eyes wander around the room. This was not a guest suite. It was the only room in the house where truth lived. Her gaze dropped to the floor where her thrifted shoes rested. They looked tired, but they had carried her farther than anyone knew. She closed the document, saved it. Then she reopened the co-ownership agreement, scanned it, and emailed it to herself under a new subject line. Just a guest. She checks her files, Finds the original co-ownership agreement from 2011. I wasn't paying rent. I was paying for silence. The spreadsheet blinked back at her. Teresa sat at the dining table, glasses low on her nose, lit by the weak afternoon light pouring through the kitchen window. The numbers weren't lying. They never had. They just waited to be seen. Groceries, utilities, school uniforms, extra gas money for Amanda's SUV. The list stretched down the screen like a slow-dripping betrayal. She hadn't tracked it all before, never needed to. She believed her presence, her care, was welcome. Necessary even. But necessity had a price, and silence, she was learning, wasn't free. She opened a second tab. 4 years. That's how long she'd lived under their roof, in what Amanda called the guest suite, but what was, technically, the second master bedroom. 4 years of blending into the wallpaper, of being spoken around and over. She began tallying the shared Costco runs she'd paid for on her card and never been reimbursed for, the electric bills she'd offered to cover just this month and then continued covering, birthday gifts for the grandkids, streaming subscriptions, the water heater repair. And then there were the school fees. Caleb had called her from work. "Can you just front it, Mom? We'll figure it out after payday." They never did. The final number, $38,274, sat at the bottom of the spreadsheet like a quiet scream. No contracts, no form. Rent. Rent. Just one assumption after another, layered so thick that even she had stopped questioning it. She pushed back from the table and stood, her knees stiff. Her fingers found the envelope where she'd tucked this month's pension deposit receipt. She had always considered it family money. Now, for the first time, she reconsidered. Amanda walked in just then, heels clicking on the tile, phone tucked between her shoulder and cheek. "No, she's not here right now. Probably at the market or something," Amanda said to whoever was on the line. Then she smiled, breezing past Teresa like she was a shadow on the wall. Teresa didn't speak. She walked quietly past Amanda, down the hallway, into her room. Closed the door. She pulled out a shoebox from the closet, an actual one, not metaphorical. Inside were bank statements, check stubs, and a few handwritten IOUs from Caleb over the years. "Thanks, Mom," one read in rushed handwriting. "Promise I'll pay you back once the tax refund comes." She sat cross-legged on the bed and sorted them into stacks. After a while, her hand moved to her purse. She pulled out her debit card, the one connected to the household account, and stared at it. It was 4:12 p.m. She had enough time before the bank closed. At the teller window, the young man greeted her politely. She filled out a slip and slid it across the counter. "I'd like to withdraw $1,000 in cash, please," she said, "and open a new checking account, just under my name." He nodded. "Absolutely. Any specific reason for the new account?" She smiled gently. "Just time to keep things separate." The cash felt warm and real in her hand, more solid than the years of forgotten thank yous and side comments. She folded it slowly, deliberately, into her wallet. Back home, Amanda's SUV was gone. The house was quiet. Teresa sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a manila folder. She labeled it in tidy handwriting, "Private Finances." She slid the new account paperwork inside. Then she pulled out the household debit card and placed it neatly next to the binder holding the monthly bills. A silent offering. A final one. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. "Hey, Mom. Amanda wants to know if you can cover groceries this week again. We're tight." Teresa didn't reply. Instead, she opened her banking app, linked the new account, and tapped out a small transfer for herself. She withdraws $1,000 in cash and opens a private account under her own name. They mocked the shoes. They didn't know where they'd been. The bell above the thrift store door jingled softly, a quiet sound lost in the hum of a box fan near the back and the whir of an old receipt printer. Teresa stepped in slowly, her old shoes squeaking faintly on the worn linoleum. She glanced once toward the small shoe rack in the corner. Same shelf, same price tags. The pair was still there, black leather, sturdy. A bit dated in shape maybe, but supportive. reliable. They matched the ones she wore to brunch last weekend, the ones Amanda's voice had barely disguised when she whispered to Caleb, "She still wears those? Should we start a GoFundMe?" Teresa had smiled then, too, just like now. She picked up the second pair and turned them over in her hands. The sole was clean, barely worn. Someone had donated them without much use. She traced her finger along the stitching near the heel, like a seamstress testing thread. Then, without hesitation, she walked to the counter. "Back again," the cashier said, friendly. "Good find?" "Perfect find," Teresa replied. "They're for somewhere important." By 11:45 a.m., she was walking through the rotating glass doors of a downtown building. The contrast was cinematic. The fluorescent lights of the thrift store were replaced by marble floors and brushed brass elevators. Her shoes clicked in the hallway, not loud, but deliberate. Her shoulders were pulled back. Her steps had intention. The receptionist in the law office lobby looked up from her monitor. "Hi there. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Teresa said. "Teresa Montrose, 10 minutes early. Mr. Lanning will be right with you. Help yourself to coffee if you like." She didn't want coffee. She wanted a chair and silence and certainty. She sat and opened her tote bag, slowly removing a file folder. Inside was a carefully curated set of documents, her pension statements, the co-ownership deed from 2011, and 4 years' worth of receipts printed from her personal budget spreadsheet. At the top of the folder was a photo, one Amanda had posted with Teresa cropped out, and beside it, the original version, which Teresa had taken herself with the timer set and the tripod balanced on a stack of books. The door opened. A man in his 40s with graying temples stepped forward. "Ms. Montrose, I'm Mark Lanning." She shook his hand. His grip was firm but not patronizing. He gestured to his office. Inside, she laid the folder on the table like she was dealing cards in a quiet game of war. "I need clarity," she began, "about where I stand and what they owe." Lanning flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. His expression shifted from neutral to focused to impressed. "This is extremely well documented," he said. "You're still legally listed on the title?" "Yes," Teresa said. "And I've contributed financially to the household for years." "And none of this was formally agreed upon?" "Number because I was family." He looked up at her then. "And now?" She folded her hands. "Now I'm a line item, a budgetary ghost." Lanning sat back. "You've done more groundwork than most of my clients. You have documentation of contribution, partial ownership, misappropriation of funds. This isn't petty, it's provable." He paused, tapping the photo of the backyard patio, the one Amanda had told Instagram was a labor of love, and which Teresa had quietly funded through a Lowe's purchase on her debit card. "You're entitled to at least half," he said finally. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Possibly more, especially if we establish misuse or codependence, especially with your name still on the deed." Teresa didn't smile. She inhaled once, slowly, then nodded. "I'd like to move forward," she said. Lanning reached for his legal pad. "Then let's begin with the timeline." She slipped off her shoes beneath the table, flexing her toes. The same thrift store shoes that carried her through brunch, through mockery, through quiet humiliation, and now here, into a room with leverage and law. She didn't look down at them. She didn't have to anymore. Lawyer leans in. "You're entitled to at least half, possibly more." They posted about generosity. I posted a budget. The photo was artfully staged. Amanda in the backyard with a steaming mug, fairy lights twinkling behind her, the soft blur of golden hour sunlight making everything glow. The caption read, "So grateful to create a peaceful home and support our family through hard times. Some of us give without needing credit. Some blessed dawning grace over grudges." It hit the family group chat with the usual flutter of hearts and thumbs-up reactions. Teresa read it once, then again. The words didn't sting. They pulsed, quiet and slow, like a bruise forming beneath the skin. She was sitting at the kitchen table when the message came through. The same kitchen Amanda had once described as a fixer-upper we're pouring love into. Teresa's coffee sat cold beside her. She hadn't taken a sip. Instead, she opened her laptop. The spreadsheet was already open, color-coded, clean. One tab for utilities, one for grocery transfers, one for gifts that weren't reimbursed. She found the electric bill from last month, $278.46, paid in full from her account. She took a screenshot. No caption, no commentary. Then she opened her own Facebook page, mostly inactive, a scattering of family photos and holiday greetings over the years. She posted the image with nothing but a quiet title, Monthly Contributions. She didn't tag anyone, didn't name names. She just let the number sit there, silent and visible. Less than 10 minutes passed. Ping. Her phone lit up with a message from her son. Caleb. Mom. What's going on with you lately? She stared at the screen for a long moment, her finger hovering above the reply bubble. But she didn't type anything. Not yet. Instead, she scrolled back through the group chat history. Last week's post, Amanda showing off the new patio furniture set. The caption, all from savings and sacrifice. Worth it for our family. Teresa remembered the Lowe's transaction, $420 on her card. The cushions were still stiff when she'd sat on them. The week before that, a family photo from the zoo. Amanda holding the kids, Caleb behind her. Teresa, cropped at the edge, only one sleeve of her blouse barely in frame. She returned to her spreadsheet, adjusted a few column totals, and added a new row. Emotional labor, undocumented but logged. A part of her expected a flood of messages after her post, demands, defensiveness, but instead, nothing. Just Caleb's question, suspended like a ceiling fan that had been turned off mid-spin. What's going on with you lately? She could have told him about the receipt she found for Amanda's spa gift card, about the neighbor who mentioned in passing, so sweet of you to help them out, about how Amanda had asked her to keep the kids out of the background during one of her live streams, as if Teresa's presence was background noise, but she didn't explain any of it. Instead, she opened the group chat. Amanda had just posted again, this time a reposted meme. Some people will never understand how much you do for them until you stop. Teresa let out the softest sound, half scoff, half breath, and typed only 4 words. Agreed. Stopping begins now. She hit send. Silence followed. In the corner of the screen, she watched the little icons flicker, seen by Amanda, then seen by Caleb, but still no reply. She stood up from the table, picked up her cold coffee, dumped it. The kitchen was quiet, again. But now it felt like her silence wasn't an absence. It was a presence, a shift, a reckoning. And just as she set the empty cup in the sink, her phone buzzed again. Caleb. Seriously? What's going on with you? She didn't answer. Not yet. Her son texts again. What's going on with you lately? Silence became its own kind of documentation. The house had a new kind of quiet. Not peaceful. Calculated. Teresa stopped volunteering details. She moved like a shadow through the kitchen in the mornings, her footsteps muffled by the worn soles of her thrifted slippers. She answered only when spoken to. Her voice remained soft, measured, but her ears were sharper than ever. That Saturday, Amanda's friend Brittany came over, loud and unfiltered as usual. Teresa heard them laughing in the living room, clinking glasses while she stood just around the corner folding laundry. The towels were still warm from the dryer, the scent of lavender softener blooming in the air as she quietly pressed the record button on her phone, screen face down on the counter beside her. I mean, Caleb's too nice, Brittany said between bites of something crunchy. If it were me, I'd have asked her to move out a long time ago. Amanda's voice was cooler. Oh, he doesn't see it, not fully, but I do. She's just dead weight now. Teresa's hands paused mid-fold. The towel, half-creased, sagged against the counter. She acts like she's doing us a favor, Amanda continued, like paying an occasional bill gives her a free pass to control the whole house. She's always here, Brittany added with a laugh. It's like living with your phone on low battery, just constant silent judgment. They laughed. Teresa didn't. She gently finished folding the towel, pressed stop, slipped her phone into her pocket. That night, as the house settled into its routine hum, TV murmuring from the living room, the upstairs shower running, dishes clinking. Teresa sat in her room with a lamp on low and earbuds in. She listened to the recording again, her fingers hovering over her laptop keys. Then she opened her email, created a new draft with a blank subject line, and typed, "Subject, for legal use. Only attachment, 07 audiolaundryroom.m4, a body, timestamp, 11:14 a.m. to 11:18 a.m. Amanda speaking, witness present. Brittany." She sent it to herself. The next morning, she cooked breakfast for the kids without being asked. French toast, just the way they liked it, golden, cinnamon sweet, cut diagonally. Amanda passed through the kitchen, barely making eye contact. "Thanks," she muttered. Teresa smiled. "Of course." Amanda didn't notice the phone propped up beside the coffee pot, quietly recording. Later that week, Caleb asked if she'd remembered to pick up milk. "I did," Teresa said, "and the cereal, and the bread, and the detergent." He glanced up, maybe sensing something beneath her tone, but said only, "Thanks, Mom." That night, Teresa opened her spreadsheet again. A new tab. Voice logs. She added a line for each date, each file name. Then she opened her calendar and highlighted the upcoming court date in soft yellow. Not because she had decided anything. Not yet. But because Amanda's voice kept echoing in her ears. Dead weight now, like a door closing slowly, firmly on years of patience. It wasn't just what they said anymore, it was what they didn't say. No thank you, no acknowledgement, no questions about how Teresa was feeling or managing her health, which had quietly begun to decline from stress and overwork. No recognition of the invisible infrastructure she provided every day, quiet pickups from school, the calendar reminders on the fridge, the weekly budget resets. Teresa wasn't angry. She was aware. She began keeping a notebook, handwritten and discreet, tucked between old cookbooks on the bottom kitchen shelf. In it, conversations, dates, receipts. She gave it a name, The Record That Wasn't Asked For. At night, she moved through the house like she always had, quiet, invisible. But now, each silence held weight. Each step was documented, each bruise of neglect noted in pen, not just in memory. And one Tuesday afternoon, after Amanda spent 30 minutes on the phone ranting about entitled people who think they deserve space just because they're old, Teresa saved the audio file, attached it to a new email, and hit send. Subject line, "For legal use only, living room rant." She sipped her tea, not blinking when the message whooshed off her screen. Because now even silence had evidence. Teresa emails herself the audio. Subject line, "For legal use only." "I packed one bag, left the rest behind, including guilt." The house was quiet the morning Teresa left. Too quiet. She had chosen a Monday. Everyone would be gone. Caleb at work. Amanda likely at brunch with friends, pretending she didn't live in a house built on someone else's labor. The kids at school. No goodbyes, no theatrics, just timing. She stood in her room, the one they called the guest suite, despite her paying half the mortgage. The air held a faint trace of lemon cleaner, and the bed was already made. Sheets tucked tight, the way her mother taught her. On the dresser sat a single piece of paper, folded neatly in thirds. No emotion in the writing, just clarity. Not staying, not funding. She had rehearsed that line in her head for weeks, rewriting it in sharper versions, ones filled with hurt, ones dripping with sarcasm. But in the end, all she needed was the truth. She didn't pack much. A black leather tote held a week's worth of clothes, her medications, a carefully zip-tied folder of legal documents, and the thrifted shoes they'd laughed at. She left behind the other pair in the closet, the newer ones, intact, unworn, still holding the price tag. Let them stare at those later and wonder. The hardest part wasn't deciding to leave, it was leaving quietly. She took one last look around the room, the calendar still pinned with reminders for the kids' appointments, the emergency list taped inside the pantry door in her handwriting, the drawers filled with small things she'd bought just to help, a first aid kit, extra pencils, toilet paper, all the little things she was never thanked for. She stepped outside without a sound. A breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the bush Amanda had asked her to plant the previous spring. She didn't bother locking the door. It wasn't hers to secure anymore. The rental was 8 blocks away, close enough to walk if she wanted, far enough to feel the distance she had earned. A small furnished unit above a retired couple's garage, white curtains in the window and a kitchenette no one else would touch. Perfect. The key was waiting in a lockbox just as the landlord had promised. He was kind on the phone, called her Ms. Teresa and said the lease paperwork would be in the mailbox. Paid in full, first and last month. No one would co-sign. No one could override it. She sat on the edge of the new bed, softer than she was used to, and looked around at her fresh start. Neutral walls, empty counters, peace. It wasn't the kind of place she ever thought she'd call home, but at least it was hers. At 5:42 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text. Amanda. Is this a joke? Teresa stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone face down on the table. She poured herself a glass of water from the little fridge, noting the hum of the appliance. No one demanding she turn it off because it was too loud. She took a sip, cool and clean, sat by the window, let the silence hold her. Later, she'd respond. Maybe. Or maybe she wouldn't. Because for once, silence didn't mean defeat. It meant distance, boundaries, power. Down the hall, her bag rested near the closet, still zipped, still simple. She hadn't unpacked yet. Not because she didn't plan to stay, but because she wanted to savor this moment. The moment of absence, of withdrawal, of quiet reclamation. No confrontation, no fight. Just a door closed without explanation. And a note they'd have to read again and again, looking for some hidden meaning. But there wasn't one. She had written exactly what she meant. Amanda texts, "Is this a joke? They called me petty. The court called me partial owner." The envelope was thick, official, and sealed with the state crest. Teresa didn't deliver it herself. She didn't have to. A uniformed process server did, at 7:58 a.m., right as Caleb stepped out to get the paper, and Amanda opened the door in her robe, coffee in hand. "Are you Amanda Saunders?" the server asked with quiet finality. Amanda blinked, confused. "Yes, why?" The stack of documents was placed squarely in her hand before she could finish the sentence. "You've been served. Ownership review, civil audit, court dates listed on the first page. Good morning." Teresa had watched from a block away, parked in her rental's borrowed car with tinted windows. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply recorded the timestamp on her notepad and wrote, "Service completed, 7:58 a.m. Wednesday." By 8:12, Amanda's text came through, all caps. "What the hell is this?" Teresa didn't reply. Inside the house, panic was blooming like mold beneath a sink. Caleb tore open the envelope and flipped through the pages, voice rising in volume and confusion. Amanda followed him into the kitchen, slippers sliding on the tile. "She's suing us?" Amanda shrieked. "What does asset freeze mean?" Caleb skimmed, then paused. "She filed for a partition review, says she's a legal co-owner, wants her financial contributions audited." Amanda's face drained. "She can't do that. Can she?" He didn't answer. He just sat down and reread the clause Teresa had highlighted herself in yellow marker. One sentence in the original co-ownership agreement, dated and notarized in 2011. All parties named retain equal rights to occupancy, asset value, and resale consideration unless otherwise renegotiated in writing. Amanda snatched the paper from his hands. "She's just being petty. This is revenge, BK. We didn't invite her to dinner. She doesn't have a case." But the word co-owner sat there in black and white, and it wasn't going away. 3 hours later, Amanda stood outside the house and yanked the notice off the door. The second envelope had arrived by certified mail, a formal notice of household audit, a court-mandated review of finances, utilities, maintenance records, and living expenses over the last 5 years. Everything Teresa had itemized, tracked, documented. Amanda tried calling Teresa. Straight to voicemail. She messaged in the group chat. "So we're doing this publicly now?" Teresa responded with a single line. "Transparency is a virtue, Amanda." At a cafe across town, Teresa met with her attorney again. She wore the thrifted shoes. Again. Polished this time. Same souls that had walked miles for that family, into grocery stores, to school plays, to doctors' offices. Now they carried her somewhere new, court-appointed legitimacy. "You'll have to testify," her lawyer said gently, sliding a court schedule across the table. "It'll be public." Teresa didn't hesitate. "Good. Let them hear it." She tucked the calendar into her folder. Her hand didn't shake. Not this time. Meanwhile, Caleb sat alone in the living room, rereading his mother's name on the title. The one he'd forgotten was there, because Amanda told him not to worry about it. She'll never push. She's not that kind of person. Apparently, she was exactly that kind of person, but only when pushed far enough. He remembered the nights she stayed up folding laundry that wasn't hers, the day she fixed their leaky sink when the plumber canceled, the envelopes that came with her name on them but paid the electric bill, the water bill, the groceries. And now she wasn't in the guest room. She wasn't at the table. She wasn't in the house at all. But her name? Her name was on the door. At 4:31 p.m., Amanda posted on Facebook, "When people you trusted betray you for money, remember, silence is sometimes greed in disguise." Teresa didn't reply, but she did screenshot it, labeled it Exhibit C Public Narrative Shift. She printed it and filed it in a folder titled Narratives and Reactions. That evening, the official court summons went live on the county website. Civil case number 582-B, Saunders vs. Saunders, hearing date scheduled for next month. Public access allowed. The court date is scheduled and public. They called it freeloading. I brought spreadsheets. The courtroom was cooler than Teresa expected. Not frigid, just clinical, like the kind of air that doesn't ask you how you feel, just registers that you're present. She walked to the witness stand slowly but without hesitation, her purse tucked neatly beneath one arm, her folder balanced atop it. She wore navy, pressed, nothing flashy. The shoes, still thrifted, had been shined with care. But it wasn't her outfit that pulled attention. It was the thick, burgundy 3-ring binder she laid on the wooden rail with the precision of someone placing a crown on velvet. "Ma'am," the judge said, glancing down at the form. "You're here to provide documentation of financial contributions, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Teresa replied. Her voice was calm, level. "Everything is tabbed, dated, and annotated." She opened the binder. A ripple of paper echoed in the room like a turning tide, pages glinting with highlighted totals, sections labeled utilities, groceries, school expenses, mortgage transfers. Each entry was followed by bank statements, receipts, and, more importantly, corresponding text messages or emails. Some printed, some screenshotted, all time-stamped. Amanda's lawyer stood, trying to object. "Your Honor, these aren't—" The judge raised a palm. "Let's see what she has." He took the binder. Teresa stepped back. She didn't sit. She just folded her hands and waited. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Amanda sat with her arms crossed so tight they disappeared into her sides. Caleb stared down at the table, unmoving. The judge flipped through the binder slowly, page by page, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly every 10 lines or so. "Miss Saunders," he finally said, glancing at Amanda, "do you dispute the financial contributions listed here?" Amanda opened her mouth, closed it, turned to her lawyer. "We were grateful," her attorney managed, weakly. "But many of these were voluntary." Teresa didn't turn toward them. She simply spoke into the stillness. "Voluntary is when I offer. Assumed is when I'm never asked. Expected is when no one thanks me. Documented? That's when I stop hoping for any of the above." The judge didn't smile, but he did nod. "Miss Saunders," he said again, softer now, "do you have any documented acknowledgement of these transfers?" Teresa tapped the back of the binder. A final section. "Here," she said. "Voicemails, text confirmations, calendar notes. My son sent a message last November. Thanks for covering the heating again." I marked it Exhibit J. The opposing lawyer paired something sharply to Amanda. She shook her head, face coloring. Caleb remained frozen. The judge looked back up. "We'll take a 15-minute recess to review this in full." Amanda's lawyer immediately rose, motioning to the bench. "Your Honor, May we confer privately before proceeding? The judge agreed. Recess granted. We'll reconvene at 2:15. As everyone began to rise, Teresa slowly returned to her seat. She didn't look at Amanda, didn't look at Caleb, just placed her binder back in her lap and gently closed it, the soft click of the rings snapping shut like the end of a chapter. Behind her, she heard Amanda's hiss. "Why didn't you tell me she had that?" Caleb didn't answer. Teresa heard only the faint squeak of his chair as he followed their lawyer into the hall. She pulled a pen from her purse, turned to the next blank line in her notepad and wrote, Section 10, Budget Binder, delivered, reviewed, confirmed. Her handwriting was careful, measured, the same way she'd recorded every unnoticed deposit for the last 4 years. Amanda's lawyer asks for a recess, whispers in panic. They said I had no proof. Then the neighbor spoke. The courtroom settled again, but this time, the hush felt different. Not the polite quiet of procedure, but a breath held. Tension stretched so tightly that even the rustle of a paper could make someone flinch. Teresa sat with her binder closed neatly in her lap. Her expression remained calm, unreadable, as the bailiff opened the door and ushered in the next witness. A woman in her early 60s stepped in, modestly dressed but with the poise of someone used to watching closely without being noticed. Her name was Helen Collins, and she lived 2 houses down from Teresa and her family, the kind of neighbor who brought over cuttings in spring and kept an eye on the block with a gardener's patience. "Please state your name and relationship to the involved parties," the judge prompted. "I'm Helen Collins. I've been Teresa's neighbor for over 12 years, she said, voice clear but measured. "I've also lived across from her son Caleb and his wife Amanda for just as long." Amanda leaned back, arms crossed tightly. Caleb fidgeted with his tie but didn't look up. "And you're here voluntarily?" the judge asked. Helen nodded. "Teresa didn't ask me to, but I felt it was time someone told the truth plainly." The judge allowed her to continue. Helen's eyes moved to Teresa, warm but firm. "Teresa practically raised those kids. She was up before sunrise walking them to school when Amanda was still asleep and Caleb had left for work. She brought them to our porch to feed stray cats. She taught them to ride bikes in my driveway." She turned slightly toward the judge. "I saw her carry in groceries every week. I saw her shovel their snow when Amanda was too cold, and Caleb had the flu. And when the electricity was almost cut off a few winters ago, Teresa told me she covered the bill, but not to mention it. They don't need to feel bad," she said. Gasps rippled from a few seated observers behind them. Amanda's face turned sharp with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. She's not even family," she snapped. The judge raised a hand. "You'll have a chance to respond, Mrs. Saunders. Continue, Ms. Collins." Helen held her ground. "She is family, Your Honor. She acted more like family than anyone else in that house, and she never asked for anything back, not even thanks." A beat of silence. Then Helen added, "Until now." The opposing attorney shifted. "With respect, this is anecdotal. She can't verify—" "She can," Teresa's lawyer interrupted, lifting another document. "And so can this." He handed over a printed statement. It was a notarized letter from the school where Teresa picked up the grandchildren 3 days a week for 5 years, with dates, logs, witnesses. Amanda tried to laugh. "So what? She's just Mother Teresa now?" "No," Helen replied from the stand softly. "She's just tired of being erased." The judge glanced through the documents again. His brow furrowed, not with doubt, but with slow, dawning acknowledgement. "Mrs. Teresa Sullivan," he said, addressing her directly, "based on the financial records, eyewitness accounts, and documentation provided, this court recognizes your contributions as substantial and sustained over a significant period." He tapped the bench with his pen once, then again. "This constitutes partial ownership under joint equity laws and qualifies for civil restitution review." Amanda blinked. "What?" Caleb finally looked up, his voice barely audible. "You mean, she owns the house?" The judge's voice was firm. "She owns part of it, and depending on valuation, possibly more than either of you." Teresa didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply turned a page in her notebook and wrote the words down, as though noting the time of sunrise. The judge declares, Partial ownership confirmed. They were thrifted, not worthless. The verdict echoed longer than expected. Not just in the courtroom, but in whispers that started seeping through family circles like steam under a sealed lid. By the next morning, Teresa's name had entered conversations it had never been welcomed in before, not as background, not as burden, as force. The first call came from her cousin, Elaine, not one of those performative cousins who sent birthday texts but skipped funerals. Elaine was the one who remembered who held the umbrella when Grandma died at the cemetery. She wasn't sentimental, but she was just. "They never deserved you," Elaine said flatly over the phone. "We all saw it. No one said anything. I'm sorry." Teresa didn't respond immediately. She ran her fingers slowly along the stitching of a worn gray loafer resting by the door. Her shoes, the ones they'd laughed at, the ones that carried her into court, quiet and steady, while they wore noise like jewelry. "I didn't need them to deserve me," Teresa replied at last, voice even. "I just needed them to understand I wasn't invisible." That afternoon, Teresa drove to a community donation center across town. She took the back streets, not to avoid attention, but to remember every block. The grocery store she'd covered receipts from, the preschool drop-off lane where Amanda had once forgotten a field trip form, and Teresa had raced across town with it, clutching it like a life raft. The donation bin stood tall and faded, its paint peeling like old regret. Teresa carried a brown paper bag under her arm. No fanfare, no music swelling in the background, just the soft creak of old soles brushing gravel. She pulled the thrifted shoes from the bag, still clean, still whole, and turned them in her hands once. The soft lining had worn through in the heel. A slight scuff marked the left toe. They weren't beautiful, but they had been faithful. She gently placed them inside the bin, but before she closed the flap, she reached into the bag one more time, a small envelope, sealed. On the front, in careful cursive, read, "Thank you for the reminder." Inside it, a printed photo. From the brunch. The moment frozen in time. Sunlight pouring in across the kitchen island, everyone mid-laugh. Teresa sat at the far end of the table, half out of frame. Cropped out online later, of course. But here, in the original, she was visible, laughing too. But her eyes looked elsewhere, already thinking. She slid the envelope between the shoes. The bin door clanged softly behind her, like punctuation. She turned and walked back to the car. A breeze pushed her scarf off her shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't bother pulling it back up. On the drive home, her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Nora, Amanda's old college roommate. They hadn't spoken in years, but the message was brief and pointed. "Saw the news. You really wore those shoes into court? Iconic." Teresa smiled, but it didn't reach her lips. Not out of bitterness, just clarity. She wasn't doing this to be iconic. She was doing this because enough was finally enough. She parked in front of her small rental and gathered her things. On her doorstep, a small envelope awaited, no stamp, just placed there. Inside, a note. Sloppy handwriting. Caleb's. "We need to talk, please." She stared at it for a long moment, fingers still on the folded crease. Then she stepped inside and left the envelope on the counter, unopened. At the bottom of the donation bag, she leaves the brunch photo. The house wasn't the only thing gaining value. The appraiser's boots made dull echoes as he walked across the tiled kitchen floor. Teresa followed a few steps behind him, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable but present. Her posture was straight, arms light by her sides, no longer folded. This time, she wasn't just standing in the background of her own life. "Original hardwoods," the man noted, tapping the hallway floor with the rubber toe of his boot. "Looks like it's been maintained." Teresa nodded once. "I cleaned them every Saturday. Lemon oil, microfiber cloth, no shortcuts." The man didn't comment. He just scribbled something on the clipboard and moved on. The house felt different now, not just because Amanda's fake farmhouse decorations had been boxed up during the legal freeze, not just because the framed quotes, "This is us," and "Gather," had come down, leaving behind faint outlines on the wall. It felt different because for the first time in over a decade, Teresa wasn't being tolerated. She was being counted. He moved through the dining room, snapped a photo, then paused near the window. Solid light, spacious layout. With the market right now, this will appraise high, especially with co-ownership settled. Teresa didn't say anything, she just followed. Quietly. He left her with a firm handshake and a final line, "Expect the paperwork by Friday." That Friday arrived with the weight of a decade attached. Teresa opened the envelope alone in her rental, her tea cooling beside her untouched. The official seal broke cleanly. No hesitation. Inside, the new appraised value stared up at her like a challenge. 6 figures higher than last year. Attached was the offer. She could request her share in a buyout, a clean cut, a check, or, the second option, transfer of full ownership. Take the house. Take everything attached to it. The taxes, the title, the kitchen where Amanda once told her, "Try not to make a mess while I prep for the party." Teresa exhaled slowly, placed the papers down. She stared at her reflection in the rental's small kitchen window. She didn't look like a woman chasing revenge. She looked like a woman walking herself home. 3 days later, she signed the document. Her lawyer, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a sharper voice, called to confirm. "You're sure?" she asked. "It's more responsibility. It won't feel like a win every day." Teresa only said, "It's not about winning. It's about restoring what was mine." The transfer was processed in less than a week. On a quiet Monday morning, Teresa arrived at the house again, not as a guest, not as an invisible wallet, not as, "Mom just staying with us for now," as the owner. The door clicked beneath her key. Familiar, solid. Amanda's voice rang from the living room. "Why are you here?" Caleb was there too, slouched on the couch, face tired, distant. He started to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but Teresa held up the papers. 30 days, she said. "You have 30 days to vacate." Amanda's mouth opened, then shut. She blinked at the page like it might dissolve if she stared hard enough. "You're evicting your own family?" "No," Teresa replied. "You did, when you stopped treating me like one." Caleb looked at her then, really looked. His expression wasn't anger. It was something more uncomfortable. Recognition. They said nothing more. Teresa turned and walked toward the kitchen. Each step echoed, but this time, it was her house, her echoes. "Amanda and Caleb have 30 days to vacate." They laughed at the shoes, but I kept the title. The key turned easily this time. No hesitation, no sense of needing permission. Teresa stepped into the house with both feet planted and the morning sun catching her silver-streaked hair. The hallway smelled faintly of old lavender cleaner and something dustier underneath. The memory of other people's routines now cleared away. The silence was full-bodied. It didn't echo anymore. It settled. Gone were Amanda's curated throw pillows and faux rustic signs. The Live Laugh Love plaque that once hung above the fireplace had left a lighter square behind, like a ghost of someone who'd never meant those words in the first place. Teresa exhaled through her nose and smiled faintly. The house looked better already. She carried in one box, just one. It held practical things, her planner, a ceramic mug from her first office job, a tape roll, and a brand new spiral-bound notebook with clean, unmarked pages. The cover read, in soft gold embossing, "Budget just me." She set it gently on the kitchen table, the one she had paid half for but never once been thanked for. With slow hands, she wiped down the counters. The motion was familiar, muscle memory, but this time it was hers. She wasn't preparing someone else's home anymore. She was reclaiming her own. The fridge door opened with a soft suction pop, empty except for a half-used bottle of almond milk and a shelf sticky with something amber and unwashed. Teresa frowned, then shrugged. She pulled on gloves and began scrubbing. The hum of the sponge. The squeak of her shoes, no longer the thrifted ones, on the tile. A faint breeze moved through the open window, carrying the scent of rain-damp soil from the garden beds outside. Everything had a new tone now. Even the wind sounded different when it didn't belong to anyone else. In the dining room, A small stack of mail sat on the windowsill, left behind, unopened, mostly junk, but among it, tucked inside a folded napkin, was something weightier. Teresa's eyes narrowed as she peeled back the paper. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in her late husband's blocky, familiar handwriting. Her heart stuttered. She hadn't seen his script in over 6 years. She sank into the nearest chair, breaking the clean stillness of the room. The air felt thick now, heavy with memory. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, a single page, hand-torn from a lined notepad, written in ballpoint blue. Protect what you build. They won't always understand what you gave, but build anyway. No greeting, no goodbye, just those lines, like he knew the day would come when she'd need them. Teresa sat for a long time with the note resting against her palm. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, maybe, when the house was fully hers in feeling, not just in paper. She walked it over to the kitchen and slid it between the first pages of her new notebook. A reminder. A foundation. That night, she made herself a simple dinner. Pan-see, red chicken and green beans, and ate at the kitchen island. No one scrolled through their phone across from her. No one left dishes for her to clean. The silence, this time, was not absence. It was ownership. She climbed the stairs slowly, touching the banister she'd once polished for guests who never thanked her. At the top, she paused at the guest room door, her old room. The door was ajar. She stepped in. It was still messy. Amanda and Caleb hadn't cleared it completely, despite the 30-day notice. But on the dresser sat one last forgotten item, a gold-embossed photo frame turned face down. Teresa picked it up. Inside was a photo from the early years, a backyard birthday party. Caleb as a teenager, Amanda in the corner. Teresa stood behind the grill, apron on, spatula in hand, mid-laugh. The image had a small tear across the top, but it was whole. She set it upright on the dresser. As she turns to leave the room, she notices a second folded paper wedged beneath the dresser leg. She kneels, pulls it free. Her breath catches. Her name is on it, in Amanda's handwriting. They watched me walk into court in thrift store shoes. They didn't see me walk out with keys. The earth was softer than Teresa remembered. Spring had loosened the soil, and each time she pushed the trowel down, it gave willingly. No resistance. That was new. For years, everything in this house had required bending, shrinking, or asking. Not the dirt, not anymore. She pressed her palms into the ground, planting the roots of 2 lavender bushes, one on each side of the front steps. They would grow wide, she hoped, fragrant and stubborn, like her. A breeze moved across the yard, tugging her sleeves. She stood and wiped her hands on a rag folded in her pocket. The thrift store shoes were gone, donated, with the brunch photo tucked at the bottom of the bag, but she still wore the same coat. Soft tan wool, practical and long-lasting. A gift from herself during a winter she hadn't told anyone she'd cried through. She stood on the path, eyes on the freshly planted flowers, when a voice called from the sidewalk. "Teresa?" It was Angela from 2 doors down, the one with the lemon tree that dropped fruit into everyone's yard. "They said you got the whole place?" Teresa turned, shielding her eyes from the afternoon glare. "I did." Angela smiled, hesitant. "Good." That was all. Good. And yet it was enough. Teresa nodded. Shoes didn't cost much, but they carried everything. Angela chuckled. "Well, you certainly walked farther than they ever expected." As her neighbor moved on, Teresa stood for a moment in the quiet, taking it in. The lawn now hers to mow. Or not. The windows hers to open. The kitchen hers to stock with whatever she damn well pleased, even if it was boxed wine and peppermint tea. Inside, the house felt lighter. Empty, yes, but not hollow. She'd kept very little. What mattered fit in a single U-Haul, but the space no longer whispered of judgment or favors or measured silence. The rooms had been stripped of pretense. She walked into the kitchen and set down a brown paper bag of groceries. The sound echoed slightly in the emptiness, but she liked it. Space. Breathing room. She placed a small ceramic bowl on the counter and dropped in a handful of key limes. Green, glossy, perfect. Bought only because she liked how they looked in the light. She poured herself a cup of tea and leaned against the counter, letting the warmth settle through her hands. The drawer next to her creaked when she opened it, still mostly empty. She slipped in the folded note from her late husband, now framed in a simple black mat. "Protect what you build." She didn't need it out in the open. She carried those words already. Upstairs, the bedroom was still undecorated. A single lamp, her bed, a side table with her journal. She liked it sparse. After years of overfilling everyone else's spaces, she was finally learning what it meant to make room for herself. In the corner sat a small stack of envelopes she hadn't opened yet, some from family members she hadn't heard from in months, a cousin's apology, an aunt's check, just in case. Teresa hadn't decided yet what she'd respond to. Some silences deserved to stay sealed. At dusk, she stepped onto the porch, sipping her second cup of tea. The lavender bushes were already turning their leaves toward the waning light. A couple jogged past and waved. She nodded back. Then she noticed a black car slowing near the corner. Amanda's profile, sharp, tense, was unmistakable in the driver's seat. Caleb sat beside her, staring straight ahead. Neither looked at Teresa. Neither stopped. Teresa didn't flinch. She simply turned, went back inside, and locked the door behind her. Not out of fear, but to mark the difference. She had walked into court in shoes they mocked, and walked out with everything they thought she'd never claim. "They laughed at my shoes. Now they'd have to knock to see them again."